A player leans toward the referee, lifts his hand to his mouth to say something quietly, and gets sent off. No foul, no dive, no tackle, just a hand over a mouth. Why is covering your own mouth suddenly a straight red card at the biggest tournament on earth? How did Paraguay's Miguel Almiron become the very first player in World Cup history to be ejected for it? For a gesture millions of players have made for 100 years? What happens when a reflex so automatic you do it without thinking turns into a suspension that knocks you out of games you waited 4 years to play? And why is half the football world calling this the most important rule in a generation, while the other half is calling it completely insane? But here's the question I really want you to hold on to. What is the single ugly moment, one most fans never even saw, that secretly forced FIFA to create this rule and change the World Cup forever? Because once you know the real reason, this absurd rule suddenly makes terrible sense. I'm saving that for the end. This is why it sucks to be a player under FIFA's new rule. Let's get into it. Let's start with what the rule actually says, because it's stricter than people think. Under FIFA's new directive at this World Cup, if a player covers his mouth with his hand, his arm, or his shirt while confronting an opponent, the referee is instructed to show a straight red card. Not a warning, not a yellow, a red, the harshest punishment in the game, the one that puts your whole team down to 10 men and gets you suspended. And notice what the rule is really targeting. It isn't punishing a foul or an act of win. It's punishing the act of hiding your face while you talk. The logic is simple and a little chilling. If your mouth is covered, nobody, not the referee, not the cameras, not anyone can prove what you just said. The hand becomes a shield. And FIFA decided that the shield itself is now the crime. On paper, it sounds almost reasonable. Keep everything in the open, protect players and officials from hidden abuse. But the moment a rule like this meets real human beings under the most intense pressure in sport, it gets complicated fast. And the first man to discover that became headline news around the world. It happened in Paraguay's group stage match against Turkey. In first half stoppage time, tempers flared after a challenge near midfield. Almiron and an opponent exchanged words, the kind of heated, forgettable back and forth that happens a dozen times in every match. And then Almiron did the most natural thing in the world. He raised his hand toward his mouth as he spoke. That was it. That was the whole offense. The referee, following the new directive to the letter, reached into his pocket and pulled out a straight red. Almiron was gone, the first player in the entire history of the World Cup to be sent off, not for a tackle, not for violence, not for an insult anyone could hear, but for covering his mouth. Paraguay played on a man down. Almiron was later handed a one-game suspension, ruling him out of a crucial match. A single reflex and a single argument cost him a chunk of the tournament he'd spent years working toward. And the moment the footage spread, the entire football world erupted, because nobody could quite agree on whether what they just watched was justice or madness. The backlash was instant and global, and it split right down the middle. One side called it a disgrace. How can you send a man off in the biggest match of his life for a piece of body language? He didn't strike anyone. There's no proof he even said anything wrong. You're punishing him for what he might have said, and might have is not supposed to get you a red card. Pundits argued it turns referees into mind readers and makes the game's biggest moments hostage to a flick of the wrist. The other side argued the exact opposite. They said this is the only way. For decades, the ugliest things said on a football pitch have been said behind a cupped hand, precisely because the player knows it can never be proven. Take away the hand, and you take away the hiding place. If a player has nothing to hide, why is he hiding his mouth? And that's the uncomfortable core of it. The rule doesn't actually claim to know what was said. It punishes the concealment itself, which means it lands on everyone, the guilty and the completely innocent, exactly the same way. And that is what makes it so frightening for the players, because of one simple fact about human beings that FIFA is asking them to override. Here's the problem. Nobody can engineer away. Covering your mouth isn't a decision, it's instinct. People cover their mouths when they're shocked, When they're frustrated, when they yawn, when they're hiding a laugh, when they're catching their breath, when they're trying to say something privately to a teammate 2 feet away. You have almost certainly done it today without noticing you did it. Now take that deep, involuntary human habit and put it in the most pressurized environment on the planet. A World Cup knockout match, 90 minutes of adrenaline, a referee specifically primed to look for that exact gesture, and attach a red card to it. A red means a suspension. 2 cautions across games and you sit out the next one. A single thoughtless movement in the 90th minute can erase you from a quarterfinal you waited 4 years to reach. So players are now doing something genuinely strange. They're walking around mid-match consciously keeping their hands away from their own faces, second-guessing in their body language, distracted from the actual game by the fear of an accidental gesture. The rule meant to clean up the sport has turned the pitch into a place where you have to police your own reflexes every second you are visible. It's a heavy price, and to understand why FIFA decided it was worth paying, why they'd risk this chaos at their showcase tournament, you have to go back to the moment that started all of it. The question I promised you. This rule was not born at the World Cup. It was born months earlier, in a single Champions League night that most people watching this video never saw. In February 2026, Real Madrid faced Atletico Madrid. During the match, an Atletico player named Gianluca Prestiani leaned in toward Real's Vinicius Jr. and covered his mouth as he spoke. After the match, Vinicius alleged that what Prestiani said behind that hand was racial abuse. And here is the agonizing part. Because the mouth was covered, it could not be proven. No clear footage of the words. No audio. Just an allegation, a denial, and a hand in the way. One of the most famous players on earth said he was racially abused on the field, and the very gesture used to do it was the thing that made it impossible to ever prove. That is the real reason for the rule. Vinicius Jr. has spent years at the center of football's ugliest, most painful battle, repeated racist abuse, much of it impossible to pin down. In FIFA, watching incident after incident vanish into "we can't prove what was said," finally decided to attack the hiding place itself. If you can't catch the words, catch the cover-up. Make the hand the crime so the abuse has nowhere left to hide. Suddenly, the absurd rule isn't absurd at all. Almiron almost certainly said nothing racist. He was very likely just frustrated. But he got caught in the blast radius of a rule that was never really about him. It was built for the players who do hide slurs behind their hands. And the price of catching them is that every innocent reflex now gets punished too. So that's the trap of being a player under this rule. You are being asked to carry the weight of football's oldest, darkest problem in your own 2 hands, literally. Keep them down, keep your face open every second, or risk being branded for something you never said. It's a blunt, brutal, deeply imperfect rule, but it exists because the alternative, a sport where abuse keeps disappearing behind a cupped palm, was something football finally refused to live with. So yeah, one small rule about a hand over a mouth turned an innocent reflex into a red card, ended a man's match, and dragged the whole sport into a fight about fairness, abuse, and proof. Maybe it's the rule that finally cleans up football. Maybe it just punishes the wrong people. If this made you see the game differently, hit like and subscribe, because next we're breaking down the controversial rule changes, quietly reshaping every sport you watch. You won't believe what's coming.